In this next coding module, we want to focus on the database side of things. We're going to be using NoSQL database, MongoDB. We can use a cloud provider, Mongo Atlas, or we can download the community edition, which is free, and install it on our operating system. So I have Windows and I'm going to install this. Click download and let the installer load. Once you have run the installer, you can see it'll be a folder called MongoDB. This is where the server lies. In the bin folder, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of applications in here. Sometimes you may need to kick off the MongoD, the daemon, to make sure that it's running. But if it's running as a background process, we can expect it to be functional. The other tool that is really nice to have is the graphical user interface, Compass. Newest versions of these packages include each other, so you may only have to do one download. We're going to download this for Windows 64-bit. Once that is downloaded, we're going to run the installer. You can always go to your task manager or services and make sure that you see MongoDB is running in the background. We can see that the shell is there, so we don't need to kickstart the daemon. It's actually running. Next up, we want to launch Mongo Compass. This allows us to actually view the collections here. So you can see to start a new connection to our local host, click connect here, and then I'll create our connection. I already have pre-existing collections that are in databases that are already created, but it has a nice little graphical interface, and you can kind of inspect and see some of the data as you're adding it. So next up, we need a connector from Node.js. We need to be able to connect to our underlying database. And this NPM package is really great. Once you have a MongoDB on your local host or in the cloud, you can connect to it with this package. The documentation it'll tell you some information on how to get started. npm install mongoose -- save. So we're going to go ahead in our command line here, and we're going to run that command. So we are installing mongoose npm package as a dependency. You can see once it's downloaded here, you can see that it has been installed right beside Express at version 8.4.1. Now we can go back to our main server file or app.js, and we need to bring this module in. So we could either bring this module in and kind of pollute our entry point or our main server file, or knowing that we're going to build a bigger app, we can actually build a connector module or a manager, and its job will just be to connect to MongoDB. And then we can import it into our main app.js and use this. It's just a way of organizing code in a way. So if we do need a database, we can bring it in. Going to initialize Mongoose, we need to use require, and then you can see here in the docs, it'll show us how to connect. So if we disconnect our module here, and you can see this is the connection string that we're going to need for our local host on port 27017. And then per the docs, we can make that connection. As soon as we bring in Mongoose, it has a method for connect. So we have the Mongoose package here, our module. Now we're going to create a little connector. This is our DB URL for localhost. This could be also the URL for the Cloud Atlas. You can use Cloud Atlas and use the URL in this way without too much configuration or difference. So we're going to use Mongoose Connect. We are going to connect to that database URL. We're going to add an event listener or event handler. So here we are. We have the Mongoose connection here. We can see that we can listen for various named events. So we're going to create a connector here, a connection object. We're going to create a DB connection object here, Mongoose connection, and then we're going to add a listener for the connection. So we are going to add the name event for open, and then apply a simple callback to let us know that the database has been opened. So a little simple callback that we're going to log to the console so that we know when we kick off our Node.js server that the web server as well as the database connection is open. We're also going to create a named event handler for errors, and we can also create a named event handler for the connection closing as well. This is really good in case something happens through that connection. so you're actually aware of it, so it doesn't just quietly close and then basically there are errors that you do not know about. So this is a good way to add some logging into your application. We can run our connection manager directly, and you can see as we ran it, it said it's connected to MongoDB. So we know we can run this module in isolation, and we know the connection is being created. But we need to reuse this functionality, because the idea is we have a module here. We would like to make it public so that we can call this in our main server file, which is our app.js. So to add some kind of capsulation to this so it doesn't just run on command line, we're going to create a function called connect to DB. And this is where when we invoke this piece of logic, then it will make the connection to the database. And then we can actually export this functionality using our module.export. We can actually provide this function and functionality to our main server file. So now when we go back to our app.js, we can bring our own custom node module in here. So we're going to bring that connection manager in. So we're using constant here, and we're trying to bring in the connector, and we're going straight to that database connection manager, and we're trying to connect and see if this will work for us. So we're going to run this directly and see if we can get the console log to show that the database is connected, and you can see connected to MongoDB. So one improvement that we could make is we need to make sure that the database is connected before we kick off our server. We certainly don't want the server to kick off, take requests without the database there. So we can do some asynchronous work here with promises such that we can actually make sure that the database is connected before kicking off the Express server. So we'll need to add some asynchronous logic in here. So we can wrap our function in async and await, and we're going to wait on the connection, which by default is asynchronous. So now that we've wrapped this in async await, now we could async await it, use a promise here because they're interchangeable, right? Async await is more ES6+, whereas promises have been around since ES5. So now we can use our asynchronous promise here. So when we're awaiting on the connection, when the connection resolves and is successful, then we can make that connection to our Express server. So you can see here we have the server starting first, and then the connection is happening after that because there is a delay in connecting to the database. It's not so instant as just running the server. So this is why we're using this kind of promise approach, so that we are going to be awaiting in the fact that the database is connected first. Back in our app.js file, what we can do is we can now put the server startup inside of this asynchronous connection so that when the server is kicked off, so now we're ready to start dealing with the underlying database. One small tweak that we could do is define our event listeners first before the await to ensure that they are configured before the connection starts. So now you can see that our events are firing. They were not firing before because our server was connecting first before our subscribers were created. So now we have this Express server starting after the Mongo connection. We're in a good place to build this out with CRUD operations and Mongoose in the next module.